So January is really the perfect time to reinvigorate your worksite wellness program. Today, we're going to talk a lot about just kind of, I would love to hear from everybody about kind of where you're at. So my presentation is a little bit shorter today to allow for hopefully more time for discussion. But I also have a lot of resources that we can look at in this presentation. And then I'm going to inundate Christy with some more toolkit resources to share out with the group after this as well. So I think some of them are pretty lengthy and will be better for you to look at on your own, but we'll talk about quite a few today as well. Okay, so it is our third and final session. So today is kind of putting it all together. That's really the takeaway message of this. We're going to put the pieces together. And why am I not advancing? Okay, I'm putting my chat down, so Christy will let me know if there's anything in the chat because I can't see that as I do the presentation. But our goals today are really to talk more in depth about where you're at in your own process and what steps need to be taken to move your goals forward. We're going to talk some more about evaluation today and also about that comprehensive wellness policy. And again, what support you might need in order to turn some of these activities into policy. Okay, so I also have a little icebreaker activity. I like to do more of these, but I was really challenged. I was sharing with Christy, I've been challenged with figuring out some of how to do some of these in a virtual format. But I did I dug this one up from my file that I like to do. So usually we have you at tables with cards on the table, but instead we're going to go by your first name. So depending on the first letter of your first name, you will either be labeled as everybody, somebody, nobody, or anybody. So take a minute to figure out which one you are. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a minute so I can pull up my little story for myself. So now that you know which one you are, we're going to all start seated. So if you're not seated already, please go ahead and take a seat. And just think about how you're sitting too. So make sure that you are sitting tall with your weight evenly distributed over your hips and your feet. You might want to move to the edge of your chair. You might want to just take a moment to kind of raise your shoulders up and down and release any tension that you might have there. So your ears are not up by, your shoulders are not up by your ears. Make sure your feet are flat on the floor. And we are going to do some standing and sitting. So I'm going to invite you to participate if you feel comfortable. You can use if you have arms on the side of your chair or if you have a tabletop, you can use those for support. But we're just going to ask everybody that would like to participate to do we're just going to do this as a little gentle chair stretch. So I'm going to read you a story. And when you hear your label, then I'm going to ask you to stand up and then just stand up for a moment and then sit back down again. Christy, are there any questions in the chat before I start the story? Okay, so this is an in motion story about somebody, anybody, everybody, and nobody. And since I can't see you all, hopefully everybody just had a chance to stand up and sit down. Long ago, somebody told us that being in motion is good for us, but nobody knew who it was. Everybody knew that being in motion would bring great benefits to anybody who is looking for a healthier life. Today, everybody will embrace the benefits of being in motion, and nobody will be left behind. Anybody that has any doubts as to what being in motion can do for them will just have to talk to somebody here today. Some of the benefits of being in motion offered to everybody are better health, improved fitness, better posture, improved relaxation, and reduced stress. Wow, this physical stuff is not just anybody's business. Therefore, somebody needs to tell the world that being in motion is the number one way to live a healthy, long life. Nobody needs to know what is second when you have in motion around. Last week, somebody asked the question, Is it too late for me to get in motion? Well, anybody and everybody should now know this answer. Nobody should get this answer wrong. So, as we move forward into the next decade, the future is bright for somebody, anybody, everybody, and nobody should be disappointed with getting in motion. Physical activity. Do it for life. All right. So that is just a very simple activity that you can do at a wellness committee meeting. You could also do it at any program activity or staff meeting, especially if it's a meeting where there's people are mostly sitting or sitting for a long time. And it's a great way to kind of put into practice one of the things we talked about last time, which is having healthier meetings. So it's a way to bring some wellness into a meeting, even if the meeting isn't wellness focused. And it, especially if you're able to see the participants either virtually or in person, it usually gets people kind of laughing, and it's a way to kind of just lighten the mood as well as get people up and stretching a little. So I hope that you guys enjoyed that, and I will make sure that Christy has a copy of that story so that you guys can use it in the future, and it does come with the instructions. So thinking about what we talked about last month and the homework that we asked you to do in between last month and this month, I have a few questions here. So you could either unmute yourself and share your answers, or you could put them into the chat and then Christy will share them with us. So I'm wondering if anybody started to hold any activities. We talked about trying to pick an activity to hold at your work site, or if anybody has any that they're planning to hold that they maybe haven't held yet, but have an idea of what they want to do.
I can chime in that we had our holiday gaming lunch one day last month, which was fun. So it's a usual thing. So it wasn't like new, but we definitely still committed to doing it, even though we're all remote.
That's great. And again, that really speaks to that comprehensive wellness we talked about last time. So, really knowing your audience and knowing that some of that social and emotional well being is just as important as nutrition or physical activity. So, that's a great, and that could be a great first activity to kind of make people feel more comfortable with maybe some of the more challenging activities you might decide to hold in the future. Thanks for sharing that, Christy.
I have one from Carrie. She says, "We are working on learning more about our staff. I've conducted 2 surveys, one regarding interest levels on certain wellness programs, and another on what values lead to workplace burnout and stress."
Oh, that's great. Again, I think January is the perfect time because people are reflecting on a lot of this personally. So they may be looking for more support. They may be struggling with some of their own personal goals. So knowing that they have that support at work, it could be really, people are likely to be more engaged. And I love that Carrie mentioned that she has some really specific questions in her survey about what kind of workplace burnout people are experiencing. So that's going to give her some really specific information. Today, we're going to talk a little bit more about activities, and I'm going to give you some other suggestions for activities that you might consider holding or where to find more information about what types of activities might be appropriate for your workplace. So if you're struggling to figure out what kind of activities to hold, this could be a good place to start. I'm also curious if anyone has, excuse me, a little tickle in my throat. If anybody has started to work on this wellness policy, if they've put any of these practices into a written policy, or if you're considering it, and what elements. Last month, you might remember we had a really lengthy list of what a comprehensive wellness policy might look like, everything from healthy meetings and food related policies to breastfeeding friendly spaces to tobacco cessation. You know, there's quite a few different categories that you could choose to include. And I'm curious if anybody has made some decisions about what elements to focus on for their policy and why they chose those elements. So I will share that I think I've mentioned to you all that we've been working on our mental health policy as part of our comprehensive wellness policy, and it's just gone before the board, and so the board has been discussing some of the language and providing some input, and then we are anticipating rolling that out to staff by next month. And we also just designated a new safety officer at our office at Extension, and so we are also exploring adding safety to our comprehensive wellness policy and providing some more education around safety to staff. So that's going to become a new standing agenda item at our wellness committee meetings, and then figuring out what to communicate to staff at our larger staff meetings. Today, I'm going to give you some links to some toolkits that are extremely comprehensive, that talk about a variety of elements. But again, I encourage you to really think about your own work sites. And if you want to choose all of them, that's wonderful. But there may be some that you choose to focus on first. And it's okay to do that, to take it one at a time, because we anticipate that these wellness policies should be living documents that you revisit, revise, add to over time. So that's up to you and what makes the most sense for your staff and your work site. And then I'd also like to invite anybody to share either in the chat or to unmute yourself and share any lessons that you've learned so far when you've been trying to implement any of this work or any of the things that we've talked about. Those lessons could be in the form of successes that you've seen. They could also be obstacles that you've encountered. I think that we learn a lot from both of those. So if anyone would like to share any lessons learned, please do so.
I would love to start a wellness program for our membership and like have it be more of like an interest group sort of thing, but that they could take back to their workplaces. But again, I'm kind of worried about buy-in because there's all this other important stuff that's happening too, especially budget things, of course. And so I'm kind of warming up and trying to find the right time to bring it up.
Yeah, so you bring up a couple of really good points that we can talk about today. One of them is something I was thinking about as I was putting this presentation together, is thinking about your target audience. So we have talked a lot about worksite wellness being for the employees at your specific worksite, but thinking about I think somebody shared earlier on that they have a really small work site and there are only a couple of employees, and that could be a challenge. So, thinking about broadening your program to either include other libraries or other community partners that may want to work together just to give you a larger group, especially since most of us are going to be doing this work virtually no matter what. So, it doesn't really matter if we're all in the same place per se, if we have a shared vision. You could also think about including some of your participants. So if there are programs that are happening at the library already, like if there's a book club or other activities that happen, would those participants be interested in participating in a wellness program, and could they be included? I've worked with other community partners that have asked those same questions and have either had separate wellness committees and wellness activities for staff and then for their clients or participants, or they've chosen to blend them together so that they could serve as models in the community. So I think that's something else that you can consider as you're thinking about this work. And it's also important to think about that when you're writing your wellness policy. Who is the audience that you're writing the policy for? Because that policy may look different. There could be different policies in place when we're working out in the community, or if we're inviting community members to be part of this work, or if it's specifically for staff. So that may be something to consider. So we also talked about this in December, the elements that make an effective worksite wellness program. And I wanted to drill down on them a little bit more today, or just refresh everybody's mind. I know there's been a lot going on in our lives since the last time we met. So these are the categories that we've been talking about: education, activity, policy, evaluation or feedback, and communication. So I wanted to give you some more information about how to put these into play. So, in terms of education, so education can be in several different forms, but this is um, not necessarily something that you're asking staff to do, like activities, which we'll talk about next, but this is information that you want them to have and to share out. So, in our wellness committee, we try to have a different education topic each month. Sometimes it correlates with the activity that we have planned, and sometimes it has nothing at all to do with the activity. It doesn't really matter, it's up to you. But we like to share some information out. This can also, you said this week, collaborate often with our human resources department. So this could be information that needs to be shared with staff annually. So if there's certain like safety protocols that need to be addressed, if there's, sometimes there's certain videos or trainings that staff are mandated to participate in, there could be a lot of crossover with wellness. So you could do those in collaboration. But sometimes it's just what's happening in the world. So if you're not sure what types of education topics you could or should be sharing, here's some of the questions that I usually ask when I'm thinking about them. So I will bring a list of these to my wellness committee each month, and I'll invite the other members to do the same. So I'll think about, okay, what's happening at our work site? So yes, is there any sort of trainings or things that people need to know about? Has there been a lot of staff turnover? So do we need to revisit some things that maybe we've done in the past? Was there a specific incident that happened in the work site that we want to address through wellness? During COVID, this was, we thought a lot about, okay, how are we going to support staff that are working from home to make them still feel a part of extension and to maybe help them with work-life balance that became a different challenge. So you might think about that. So what's relevant to your work site? You can also ask what's happening in your community. So are there specific needs? We know food insecurity has been a big issue in our community, and there's been a lot of efforts to try to make sure that people have more food resources. So that's something today we've allowed staff to volunteer for a food donation, and we promoted that through the wellness committee. Last month, we did an adopt a family project and asked staff to contribute to that if they wanted to participate. Um, and then you can think about if there's things happening across the state or nationally. And then are there challenges that you're observing that you think staff could use help with or support? So those are some of the questions I usually ask. And then if you're not sure, if you're still coming up against a wall, here's some good resources that I like to check out. So you can Google monthly health observances. I usually like to put the year in because sometimes they change from year to year. So 2021 monthly health observances, you can Google. But here's some sites that I often will look at. And these will tell you month by month what all of the national health observances are. So what's going on across the nation. So it reminds you that February is Heart Health Month. March is National Nutrition Month. Eventually you'll start to get to know some of these, but sometimes some new ones pop up. And then, some of them may have nothing to do with your employees, so you choose not to address them, but some may be really relevant. And then here's some more educational resources to think about. So if you want to provide a nutrition topic, but you're not an expert in nutrition, it's really important that the information that's shared through the wellness committee is evidence-based scientific information. We know that people are inundated with lots of information through Facebook, and we want to ensure that wellness committees are providing factual information and not fads or just things that they have seen, from sites that blogs or things like that may not be supported by science. So you always want to make sure that whatever website you're going to for educational resources ends with .gov or .edu. So those are going to be evidence-based sites. If you're looking for nutrition information, the myplate.gov website has a wealth of information. It has handouts that you can give out. It separates the information by audience. It also separates it by season. So for different times of the year, there's different information. There's things about nutrition, there's recipes, there's also resources for physical activity. And they have a new app that can help people track their food and their calorie intake. So there's a lot of resources there, and you could choose to share one each month with staff. I also recommend that people go to their local public health department. So again, that's going to be a place to get some factual information, and it can be relevant to your community. So for us during this time, we've shared a lot of information about COVID safety, safety over the holidays, safety around traveling, and then just worksite general safety, how to stay safe at work. A lot of that information we were able to get right from our public health. And then they often will link to places like the CDC that you're going to get really great information, and they often have a lot of resources, so you can find posters, PDFs, things like that that you could share out with staff. And I may have mentioned this one last time. This is one of my new favorites, the Monday campaigns. This is a Monday newsletter that you can get right in your inbox, and it has tons of information, recipes each week. There's a lot of great resources on mindfulness, mental health, creating that work-life balance. But there's also information about physical activity and how to break it down into simple steps. So it's very approachable. So the Monday campaign, you could choose a different topic each Monday, and you don't have to recreate the wheel. They have it all there for you. So here's some other suggestions if you're thinking about, okay, I want to do this, but where do I get started? So for January, if you're doing this month or even into February, we chose to focus on National Blood Donor Awareness Month. Our office shares a building with the American Red Cross, so it was really easy for me to get information to share with staff. We know that across the nation, but specifically in our community, there is a shortage of blood, and that a lot of blood drives had to be canceled because of COVID. And also, we knew that people were uncertain if it was safe to donate blood during COVID. So we were able to get some great information. I learned a lot and share that out with staff. So that was our educational topic for January. And if anybody is interested in more information about that, I can share it with you as well. Because it's January, it's always a great idea to talk about New Year's resolutions, goal setting, and the Monday campaign that I just showed you has some great resources for that. So I've been sharing those out in some of our communications. And although we're turning into 2021, the 2020 to 2025 dietary guidelines just came out just at the beginning of January. These dietary guidelines are reviewed and revised every 5 years. So they should have come out in 2020, but because of lots of things, I think it got put a little bit on the back burner. But that's a great thing to share with staff. So any changes to the dietary guidelines, you can share with them. Again, COVID safety tips, really relevant right now. So you can look and see if there's any new information to be shared. And because it's winter time, I think everybody struggles with ways to stay active. It's even maybe a little bit more challenging as maybe some people's gyms and things are closed. So providing resources to help people be active. So this could be both an education topic, and then this could also tie into your activity. If you wanted to provide an activity to help people stay active in the winter, that you could do that as well. But it could also just be an educational topic, pointing people in the direction of different resources. So that's it for education, how to share education each month and where to find some resources. If anybody has any questions about that, please feel free to put them in the chat, or you can always contact Chris Ura afterwards. Okay, next up, I don't know how successful I'm going to be with this. I'll be honest with you guys. If we were all in person, this would be much easier. But I wanted to give you an example of a fitness break. So we're going to attempt to play this YouTube video. This is an oldie but a goodie. It's a favorite of mine because it shows people in an office setting as opposed to some of the other fitness breaks out there that are young kids or fit people in exercise clothes. This is what a fitness break at a work site could look like. I'm going to invite you all, if this comes up, to participate in the fitness break if you so choose. All right. Well, I'm going to talk over it for a minute. You'll have the link to this in your in the PowerPoint presentation. And so I apologize. I'm not very tech savvy. But as I said, what I love about this is that it looks like real people. The activity is appropriate for people of all fitness levels. And I think people will, when they see this, they feel more comfortable participating than some other fitness break videos that I've seen. And you don't need a lot of space. So obviously, right now during COVID, this would be something that you could share and do virtually, or you could send out the link and choose a time when you invite everybody to participate, and they can either participate socially distanced if they're in the office, or from wherever their remote work site location is. But you could have a designated time each day, or you could just leave it up to people to decide when to put it into their schedule. You could have a way for them to track if they've taken a fitness break. But this is a great, I think this is a great one to show as an example. Instant Recess is a program that started in California several years ago. And they have a bunch of these physical activity break videos that you can find on YouTube, or you can just Google Instant Recess. And it's a great resource so that you don't have to be a fitness instructor. You don't have to know what you're doing. You can just send these links out and people can participate um, however they so choose. But that's basically it. So, and the idea is that they last 5 minutes or less. So that's just a fun way to include fitness. Again, you can send this out for people to do at a designated time or whenever they so choose. Or oftentimes, if we have longer meetings, so written into our wellness policy is that if a meeting lasts 90 minutes or longer, that we will include an opportunity for people to stretch or get a fitness break. So you could pop this into the middle of a program, or if you're giving a lengthy webinar, again, it's just a way to get people up and moving, give them a little stretch. And I did that as a segue into activity ideas. So if you see the link at the bottom of this screen, Snack Nation, although this is a .com and not a .org or a .gov, like I just told you should be looking at, they had a lot of great ideas in here. And it is a blog that I would recommend taking a look at, just to get some ideas for things that could work in your employee wellness program. So I included some of the ideas from that. They have a huge list, and they have a lot of more information about how to implement them. But I tried to include some that you could still do during the pandemic. So organizing virtual lunch and learn webinars, that could be having different staff lead them, or bringing in guest speakers from the community, having somebody from the Y or from another fitness person come in, do somebody who could do something on mindfulness or meditation. Any of those types of activities you could do virtually. Starting a book club, I'm sure you guys are all experts at that already, or some other activity that can be done virtually. So virtual paint and sip. Even my kids have done a virtual paint and sip over the holiday break. They had hot cocoa and painted Christmas scenes. It was wonderful. Or another sort of craft activity where you could distribute the materials and then everybody could participate virtually but feel like they're doing it together. Or you could send a list of materials people need to go out and get, and then a time when they can come together and do the craft. It could be something people could sign up for. The fitness break, like I just showed you the video. So this could be something that could be announced to staff that it's going to happen at a certain time. Maybe somebody comes over a loudspeaker and says it's time for our fitness break. Or again, you could leave it up to people to do it more. There could be more flexible options. Holding a recipe swap. So this is a fun way to engage people because everybody loves food. And while we can't do some of the more traditional potlucks and food sharing that we might normally do, we could still swap recipes. And you could also choose to put those recipes into a healthy office cookbook. You can even use that as a fundraiser. But it's a fun way to collect all of those great recipes, or you could share them out virtually or put them into a cloud. Gratitude challenges, those have been really popular, especially in November and December, or also finding ways to volunteer in the community. I mentioned that we participated in a food giveaway, and we did an adopt a family food drive. So there are still opportunities out there. They may be more limited right now, but there are still ways to get involved. And then some more of the traditional monthly challenges. So encouraging people to be physically active. These activities don't have to happen in the office if people are not always in the office at the same time, or if people are working remotely. So you can still do a plank challenge, a squat challenge, stair climbing challenge anywhere, and then allow people to log their progress. Walking challenges. So we've had a lot of success with doing those virtually. And then you could still organize small group activities that happen outdoors, that could still happen socially distanced and safely. So things like having everybody go for a skiing outing or snowshoeing or hiking, those are things that could still potentially happen in person as group activities. We have so our local 4-H, they have moved a lot of their activities to virtual, but they are doing some cross country. They have a cross country ski club and snowshoeing days, and then they previously were doing monthly hikes. So those, yeah, those things, people still need to find ways to get outside, and especially, we know a lot of people that maybe aren't from this area may not realize that we actually can go outside and enjoy nature in the winter. All right. Well, I hope we've jogged your mind, got you thinking about some potential activities that might be suitable for your site. So now I want to talk a little bit more about policy. As I've mentioned in the past, policy is important. It's an important part of this process because you don't want to put forth all of this effort and get a program started and then not have it be sustainable. And policy really helps to ensure that the program is sustainable beyond just one champion's efforts. It also really sends a strong message that it is part of your worksite culture and the culture of your organization, and that it's an expectation, not that people participate in everything, but that it is going to be ongoing, even if even if parts of it are optional. I think so. Those are some things that maybe get people a little bit hung up on policies. It just seems so permanent. So it's an important piece, but it shouldn't be the first step. As we've mentioned, really testing out some of these activities, trying things out, providing some of the education, those steps come first. And that's why I put them in this order. And then policy comes after you sort of figure out what works and what makes sense for your organization. Then you put it into policy. But something that shouldn't be overlooked as part of the process. That it can be daunting, and then people can sometimes not really know how to put something into policy, what it should sound like. There's really no right or wrong answers, but I did provide you with some great toolkit resources here. These are pretty lengthy documents for the most part, so keep that in mind. And I've tried to identify the pages here in these documents that are most relevant to the actual policy part. But you'll find lots of other resources in these toolkits that you can use for other parts of our discussion. But it's going to be up to you, again, in your organization, how in depth you want that policy language to be. So some of the best practices that you'll see in these toolkits, obviously, they're giving you the gold standard. So they have a very in-depth policy. That might not be where your organization chooses to start. You might just want to get something down, that your worksite supports worksite wellness and will encourage members to participate in a wellness committee, and that these are the components of wellness that will be discussed. That's a wellness policy. It can be that simple, and then over time it can be refined and it can be lengthened. So it doesn't have to necessarily become this huge 100-page document that you might see in some of these toolkits. One of the things that this middle resource, the Nevada Worksite Wellness Toolkit, does that I really like is they give you sort of 3 categories. for the activities and then how that would translate into policy. So, depending on the resources that you have available, the buy-in that you have, there's many factors that could play into how in depth you want these activities or policy to go. But it gives you a starting point. So, if you're just getting started, maybe you might look at installing a bike rack to increase physical activity, to encourage people to ride their bike to work. If you had more money, time, and investment, maybe you might choose to put in, they talk about like putting in lockers so people have a place to keep their clothes for fitness, or built in flex time so that people are encouraged to go participate in fitness classes in the middle of the day. Down the road, if your employer is willing to invest, maybe they're going to put in a gym at your work site. So obviously, not all of us are going to have the luxury of having a gym at our work site, but there's always some small first step that we could take. And maybe a bike rack is not a first step for you. Maybe it's just letting people know where they could be active in the community, and it's more of an education piece. And then maybe it's bringing in somebody for a one-time physical activity, or doing a virtual physical activity. It's there's no cookie cutter model for any of this, but I like that the Nevada Worksite Wellness Toolkit kind of gives you some of those options of like small, medium, and large steps that you could take. So I'm not going to go through these documents with you because, like I said, they're pretty lengthy, but I will encourage you to take a look at them because there's just a ton of great information here, and they're all evidence based. Okay, so the next part of our process that we've talked about is evaluation. And evaluation, again, sometimes can seem kind of daunting to people, but it's really just asking that simple question of, did what we chose to do make a difference? And if are we going to do it again? And if we're going to do it again, is there anything we would do differently? So here are some evaluation resources that you could use. So the CDC, again, has this huge toolkit with tons of great resources. But one of the things that they have that you could either use at the beginning of your process when you're kind of assessing how to get started, or then once you've started a program, is the scorecards. It gives you different categories to look at, and then you can go through and kind of score where your work site is. So you can see where you're already putting some effort, or maybe where you might want to focus. Again, this Nevada Worksite Wellness Toolkit is fabulous, and they have a whole section on evaluation. So those are two that I would recommend for getting started. And those are just, to give you some ideas for how to evaluate your program, but it really doesn't have to be that formal. It can really be a discussion at a wellness committee meeting. Okay, we tried having a virtual fitness class. So how can we evaluate that? We can look at how many people said that that's something that they wanted the wellness committee to take on. When we surveyed staff, we had 6 people say that they would want to participate in a virtual program. How many people actually participated on the day when we held the event? So maybe only 1 or 2 people actually participated. And you might also evaluate what methods did you use to communicate that with staff. So how did you let people know that that event was happening? Did you give them enough time? Maybe you advertised it too early, and people got busy. Were there other things that were happening? Did you try to do it in December when there was a lot of stuff happening, wrapping up end of year at work, and also a lot of personal stuff going on? Maybe it was not a good time of the year. What was the quality of the program? Um, did people have difficulty with technology? Did you bring in somebody who was an accredited professional, or, what was the quality? And then what was the feedback from the people who did participate? So did you ask people that did participate why they liked it? Did you ask people who said they wanted to participate and then didn't, why they were unable to participate or why they chose not to? So those are some of the ways that you could evaluate a program. So it could be just having those kinds of conversations. It could be sending out a little post survey after you try an event. Hey, what did you think? And again, you could do that through like SurveyMonkey, or we use Qualtrics a lot. Or you could just send it out as an email, please send me your comments. There's lots of different ways you could collect that and evaluate that. But that's basically what you're looking at. What did we do? How did it go? And what would we do differently next time? And it's great to be able to get some information that's you may have opinions from the wellness committee, but really from the other staff, making sure that you're including data in that evaluation. The most important thing with wellness is that you can collect all this data, you can solicit feedback, you can do everything we're talking about for best practices, but at a certain point, yeah, you've just got to kind of start trying stuff and see what happens. The more information you're able to collect, uh, likely the more successful you're going to be, but you're never going to know 100% if something's going to work or not unless you try it. So that's great. Trying something out. I like that it's accessible to everyone. So finding a communication method that's going to be accessible, and it's optional. And I think those are all really important components to wellness activities. Is that they should be easy for people to participate in if they want to. They should be encouraged, but people should not feel any pressure. They should do it because they want to do it. So that's great, which is a perfect segue into communication. So when I talk about communication, communication can be used in a variety of ways. So communication is going to be used for how you encourage people to participate in the wellness committee and how they know about wellness committee meetings or projects. Communication is also how you're going to communicate the activities that you're doing. Some of these mechanisms may also be how their activities are being held. And it can also be a mechanism for some of that education that we talked about. So there's lots of different communication strategies. And again, it's not a one size fits all. Every workplace is going to be different. And you have to think about your target audience and how are they going to be most likely to receive this information. Chances are you're going to need a combination of several different communication strategies because even amongst our worksite cultures, we know that people like to receive information in different ways. And we're all being inundated with lots of information these days. So some of it just doesn't stick, right? So these are some suggestions for ways that you could communicate that will still work during these COVID crazy times. Email might be a good way to communicate. Everybody has work email, but some things to keep in mind, how much are people reading their emails? Do people get so many emails that they can't keep up with them and they're just going to go right to their junk folder, or they're just not going to feel like they have time to really read that email because they're overwhelmed by other work emails? Or is that the most convenient way to really get the message out to the whole staff? So those are some questions you might ask. I highly recommend that when you are doing your staff assessment, that survey that you're going to send out asking staff about wellness, that you include all of these things. So what education topics are people interested in? And you can give them some of those categories or suggestions. What types of activities are they interested in? And how would they like you to communicate with them? This is all really useful information. We are starting to explore videos more. So they can be very silly and lighthearted, or they can be more serious. But we're finding that's a fun way to communicate with people because, yes, reading another email, sometimes you just can't absorb all the information. But for our virtual holiday celebration, we had get together similar to what Christy was mentioning. We did a video invitation. And so the staff that chaired up that project, they created a really cute video invitation. And everybody loved it and saw it, and it really helped to boost participation. And it was really silly and fun. Blogs. So if that's something that your office has already, or something that you think would engage people, and you could have different writers. So it could be you, or if there's a different person who's chairing your wellness committee, different wellness committee members could contribute. But how great to show buy-in if you could get some of these higher level decision makers to be guest writers for the blog. Podcast is also becoming a more popular option and a way that people are receiving information. And again, it's an option. So that way it's something that people are choosing to log into. It's not something that they're just getting like they're feeling like they're getting spammed. If you have some sort of an intranet, that could be another way to share information. Hotline telephone number for wellness information or important announcements. And there's also, so we're using for other purposes, but we are using things like Google Voice or the Remind app. So those are things that could also be used for a wellness committee. So people can opt into it if they want to receive um, texts that have helpful wellness tips or reminders about wellness activities. They could opt into this, and you can send out a mass text using those services. Those are kind of fun new options, and they're all free. Does your wellness committee want to create a newsletter, or do you already have a newsletter? And could you devote a column to wellness? Some of these communications get back to that earlier question too of who's your target audience. So, do you want your audience to exclusively be employees, or are you also including community members? Or is it across several organizations? And that might also dictate which communication method is going to be most successful, depending on who your target audience is. Newsletters, you also want to think about, is this something that's going to be a print newsletter or a virtual newsletter? Is it something that's going to go out as an e-newsletter? Or will it be something that people need to pick up or needs to get dropped off or mailed? How are people going to see it? Bulletin boards, also same thing. Those could be an online digital format or physical. And is that something that you already have? Is there already a mechanism in place where there's a place where people are used to receiving information or seeing updates? Chances are your communication is going to be most successful if you're glomming onto something that's an existing platform rather than trying to create something new if people aren't in the habit of it. But that doesn't mean you couldn't try it. So I mentioned to you that we started a Facebook group for wellness. So yes, that's something new that people have to log into, but we found that most of our staff were already going onto Facebook. So that seemed like a pretty easy leap. My favorite communication is just trying to get it to be a standing agenda item at meetings that are taking place. So I've mentioned at our full staff meetings, wellness is a standing agenda item. It's the best way to get information out to the whole staff because everybody's at the meeting and it's led by our executive director. So it creates some built in buy in, the fact that he is announcing that wellness is a topic on that agenda at each meeting. And then I mentioned lunch and learns as a potential for education, but it can also be a way to provide more information. So you can communicate upcoming events or remind people about meetings if they're already participating in lunch and learns. Those lunch and learns may be wellness focused or they may be about other things. That you could be learning about how to use Zoom or other technology, and maybe you're able to put in a plug about some wellness activities. I think the most challenging thing about communication is trying to figure out if it's been effective. So, again, getting feedback on your communication strategies is extremely helpful because you can do all of these things. And sometimes it can be difficult to know if they have really hit the mark or not. Is it too much communication? Is it too little? Do people like what they're seeing? Is it something that most people are seeing or not? So figuring out how effective your communication strategies are and getting that feedback to me is very important. Communication can also take a lot of effort. And so if you don't have a lot of time, you want to make sure that you're able to do something that's the most effective with the least amount of effort. So putting it all together, you've heard me say this before. So these are the steps we kind of just talked about. But the point is that it's really an ongoing process. It never stops. It's circular. So you're just going to kind of keep looping through this over and over and over again and stopping and refining. Getting that assessment on the front end and asking employees what they want or need. I'm in the process of doing this with our wellness committee right now. So it's January. We think that's a great time for most of us. Depending on your organization, it can line up with your fiscal year, the start of a new fiscal year. For schools, September might be a good time to do this. It's thinking about but there's no time like the present. So our annual assessment survey asking staff what they'd like to see the wellness committee take on this year. We will go through that information. So we'll send ours out as a Qualtrics survey. I'm also going to send with Christy, I found some other print examples of some surveys that may give you some ideas for some questions to ask. But again, thinking about your own organization, what do you think people are going through that they might be interested in? So try to tailor it to your own organization. But these might give you some ideas. So once you get that information from your staff, developing an action plan. And remember, your action plan, again, it doesn't have to be so formal, but it's just thinking about what are the goals, what are the things that you heard people say they'd be interested in, which ones seem feasible to start with. So just because, people might say that they would love to have a weekly Zumba class, but is that realistic? Is it feasible? Do you have the resources you need to do that right away? Maybe or maybe not. So thinking about which ones can you actually, of what people have told you they're interested in, which activities or education or components do you think you could tackle right away? And then who is going to do it? So it shouldn't always be just the one champion. It shouldn't just be the wellness committee coordinator carrying out all of these activities. You should be asking for volunteers, getting different people who have different expertise to lead certain things or making those contacts in the community. That's going to give you the greatest buy-in. It can't just all come from one person. And then setting some goals for how long you think it will take, and how you're going to know if you were successful. So you're going to develop that action plan, and then you're going to carry it out. So you're going to try some wellness activities. You're going to choose some educational topics. You're going to pick some different ways to communicate with staff. And then based on how that all goes, you're going to put some of it into a policy. And then you're going to kind of cycle through that again, because once you put something into a policy, then you're going to communicate that policy to staff. You're going to ask for some feedback on the policy. You're going to see how the policy goes, and you're going to continuously revisit that. And that is all part of your evaluation process. So every time you try something, whether it's your wellness committee meeting schedule, whether it's education that you put out, the different communication strategies, the activities, or your policy, you're going to evaluate all of these different elements continuously. And then once you have got that information, you're going to go right back to that assessment step again. Okay, so these are the 3 things that we took on. Here's what happened. What should we do next? And it just will continue to cycle through. And it sounds very formal, but it really doesn't have to be. I hope that that message is clear, that this is it's a process, but it's going to happen. It's going to get more natural as you get used to doing it, but it's going to keep your program effective and successful, as opposed to just shooting darts at a wall and hoping for the best. You want to know that the things that you're doing and the effort you're putting forth are well received and successful. And that is it for my presentation today.